The desert sun beat down mercilessly as little girl ventured beyond her tribal lands. Her keen eyes spotted it first, a wooden cabin nestled against red rocks, its windows dark as empty eye sockets. Something pulled her forward, despite the warnings of her elders, about places where white settlers had lived and died. Inside, dust covered everything like a shroud, a half-eaten meal, a child's toy, everyday items abandoned in haste. The floor creaked beneath her feet, revealing wooden boards that didn't quite match. A hidden door, a cellar entrance. What terrible secret had the settlers discovered that made them flee in such panic? What ancient horror lurked beneath the floorboards? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Apache people called her Tse-iya, which simply meant little girl in their language. At 12 summers, she had yet to earn her true name, a fact that both troubled and motivated her. Among her people, names were not given, but discovered through deeds or visions that revealed one's nature. Little girl lived with her tribe in the harsh Arizona territory of the 1880s, a time when her people struggled between ancient ways and the encroaching world of the white settlers. Her parents had died from the spotted fever when she was just 5, leaving her in the care of her grandfather, Naiche. The tribe's respected medicine man. "You wander too far, little one," Naiche would say, his weathered face creasing with concern as she returned from her solitary explorations. "The spirits beyond our lands are not all friendly to our people," but curiosity pulled at her like a swift current. While other children stayed close to camp, little girl collected treasures from abandoned places: a tarnished silver thimble, colored glass bottles, a metal button with an eagle embossed on its face. On her sleeping mat beside the fire, little girl fingered the small deerskin bundle her grandfather had given her on her 10th birthday. Inside lay a carved stone bear, her clan's protective spirit, along with juniper berries, sage, and a small obsidian arrowhead. The medicine pouch was meant to ward off harmful spirits, though Naiche warned it was only as powerful as her belief in it. Some things sleep in the earth that should not be awakened, he had told the tribe just last night as they gathered around the council fire. The drought had forced them to move their camp closer to places where the white eyes had settled and abandoned. Our ancestors knew to avoid the hollow places where shadows have weight and substance. Little girl remembered the stories. Tales of the shadow people who could slip inside a person through their eyes or mouth, wearing their skin like borrowed clothing. As a small child, these stories had kept her close to the fire. Now they only fueled her desire to see such wonders for herself. For 3 moons, she had dreamed of a wooden structure nestled against red rocks, its windows dark and inviting. Each night, the dream became more vivid. She could smell the aged wood, feel the smoothness of a doorknob beneath her palm. This morning, little girl woke before dawn with absolute certainty. Today, she would find the cabin from her dreams. She prepared carefully, filling her water skin and packing pemmican for the journey. At her waist hung the knife her father had carried, its bone handle smooth from generations of use. Around her neck, the medicine pouch rested against her skin, warm and reassuring. The tribe was moving camp today, following the small stream that still held water despite the long drought. In the activity of breaking camp, no one noticed when little girl slipped away, heading west toward the red rock formations that matched those in her dreams. As the sun climbed higher, little girl crossed a dry stream bed and paused to examine something half buried in the sand. Her fingers closed around a smooth, round stone, unlike any she had seen before. It was perfectly white, marked with a single red line that circled its center like a bleeding equator. When she held it to the light, the stone seemed to pulse faintly, as if with its own heartbeat. The boundary stone. Her grandfather had spoken of such markers left by ancient ones as warnings. Places where worlds grew thin, where things could cross that did not belong in the land of the living. Little girl should have left it buried. She should have turned back toward her people. Instead, she slipped the stone into her pouch and continued westward, drawn by the certainty that her dream cabin waited just beyond the next rise. Behind her, the desert wind erased her footprints in the sand, as if the earth itself wished to protect her from what followed. The sun had climbed to its highest point when little girl crested a rocky ridge and paused to drink from her water skin. The landscape before her stretched into unfamiliar territory, a maze of sandstone formations and sparse vegetation, unlike the lands her tribe typically traversed. She had been walking for hours, guided only by the pull of her dreams and an inexplicable certainty about her direction. The usual desert sounds, the skittering of lizards, the distant cry of hawks, had gradually diminished until an unnatural silence enveloped her. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Little girl crouched to study the ground, her fingers tracing indentations in the hard-packed earth. Wagon wheels had passed this way, cutting deep grooves that time and weather had yet to erase completely. White settlers had journeyed here perhaps recently. A glint of metal caught her eye. Partially buried beneath a scraggly sage bush lay a rusted spur, its rowel still intact though frozen with age and exposure. Little girl dug it free, turning the object in her hands. The craftsmanship was fine, not the mass-produced items traders sometimes brought to exchange with her people, but something made with care by a skilled hand. She could almost feel the imprint of its owner, a man with hard eyes who rode with cruelty, whose boots had pressed into a horse's flanks with unnecessary force. The metal seemed to pulse with anger, with memories of pain inflicted. Her grandfather had taught her that objects sometimes retained the essence of those who owned them, especially items carried close to the body for many years. This spur carried dark energy, and her first instinct was to drop it back to the earth. Instead, little girl wrapped it in a scrap of cloth and tucked it into her small bag. Such an object might prove useful, a warning or protection against whatever lay ahead. As she continued westward, the land began to change. Vegetation grew more sparse, the soil beneath her feet transitioning from red dirt to pale, almost white sand that reflected the sun's glare with painful brightness. No tracks marked this ground, not even those of animals. It was as if all living creatures avoided this path. The boundary stone in her pouch had grown inexplicably cold, its surface no longer smooth, but etched with lines that hadn't been visible before. When she paused to examine it, little girl saw that the single red line had multiplied into dozens of intricate patterns that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. A chill ran through her despite the afternoon heat. She was crossing boundaries not meant to be crossed. Ahead, the land dipped into a shallow valley, and there, nestled against towering red rocks, exactly as in her dreams, stood the cabin. From this distance it appeared ordinary. Weathered wood planks, a pitched roof missing several shingles, a stone chimney leaning slightly to one side. Windows dark as empty eye sockets stared out at the desert. Little girl's heart quickened. Around the cabin, the air seemed to waver like the heat mirage above hot sand. Yet this distortion carried an unmistakable coldness that raised goosebumps on her arms. Something moved at the edge of her vision. A flicker of shadow, too solid to be cast by the sparse vegetation. When she turned to look directly, nothing was there. "Who walks with me?" she whispered in her native tongue, hand moving instinctively to the medicine pouch at her neck. Only silence answered, but the sense of being observed intensified. Not by human eyes, nor by those of any creature she recognized. This gaze felt ancient and hungry, patient in a way that spoke of centuries of waiting. The sun had begun its descent toward the horizon. Soon darkness would claim the land, and little girl knew with bone-deep certainty that she should not be near the cabin after sunset. Yet her feet carried her forward, down the gentle slope, toward the weathered structure that had haunted her dreams. The door hung askew on leather hinges, half buried in tumbleweeds and sand. As she approached, the air grew noticeably colder, her breath forming small clouds that dissipated in the still air. Little girl paused at what once might have been a garden, now just bare earth in a perfect circle around the cabin. Not even the hardiest desert plants grew in this soil. At the perimeter of this dead zone, she knelt and pressed her palm to the ground. The earth pulsed beneath her hand, a subtle vibration like a distant heartbeat, or something large shifting far below the surface. Little Girl circled the cabin cautiously, studying its weathered exterior before daring to approach further. The structure had been built with care, dovetailed corners, a stone foundation, glass windows that would have been difficult to transport to this remote location. Someone had valued permanence, had planned to stay. From the back of the cabin, evidence of hasty departure became clear. A broken wagon wheel leaned against the wall. Beside it, a trunk with its contents scattered, moth-eaten clothing, a man's boots caked with dried mud, torn pages from a book whose words had faded into illegibility. The ground told stories her people had taught her to read. Multiple footprints led away from the cabin, large boots belonging to a man, smaller impressions of a woman, and tiny tracks of at least 2 children. They had fled together, heading east toward settlements. The tracks disappeared abruptly at the edge of the dead zone, as if the earth had swallowed the family whole. Something glinted in the dirt where the child-sized footprints ended. Little Girl knelt, brushing away sand to reveal a silver locket on a delicate chain. The metal was untarnished, despite exposure to the elements, shining with unnatural brightness. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. The locket was warm to the touch, as if it had been lying in the sun, rather than half buried in cool sand. When she pressed the tiny clasp, it opened to reveal a curl of blonde hair tied with thread, and a miniature painting of a young girl with solemn eyes. The moment the locket fully opened, a cold gust of wind swirled around Little Girl, though the air had been still moments before. The sensation of being watched intensified, and with it came a soft sound, like a child's whisper, just below the threshold of understanding. Little Girl snapped the locket closed, but the whispering continued. She slipped the chain over her head, tucking the silver pendant beneath her dress, where it rested against her skin, beside her medicine pouch. The metal grew warmer, almost uncomfortably so. Near the cabin's rear wall, strange symbols had been carved into the wood, not the familiar pictographs of her people, nor the letters used by white settlers. These were older, the lines flowing in patterns that hurt her eyes if she looked too long. Similar markings adorned the window frames and the base of the stone chimney. Some were clearly protective symbols, though from a tradition unknown to her. Others appeared to be warnings or bindings. Most disturbing were those that had been partially scraped away, as if someone had deliberately removed protections that had been put in place. Little Girl completed her circuit of the cabin, returning to the front where the door hung open in silent invitation. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, painting the desert in gold and deep purple shadows. Shadows that seemed to stretch toward the cabin rather than away from it, defying the sun's position. She should leave now, return to her people while light still guided her path. Yet the silver locket pulsed warmly against her chest, and the boundary stone in her pouch had grown icy cold, opposing sensations, creating an unsettling balance. "I know you're here," she said aloud, addressing whatever presence watched from just beyond perception. "I've come because of my dreams." No answer came, but the air around the door seemed to thicken, darkness gathering despite the late afternoon light. From inside came a sound, a soft thud, as if something had fallen or been moved. Little Girl's hand went to her father's knife, drawing it from its sheath. The blade caught the sun's rays, flashing a warning. Her grandfather's voice seemed to whisper in her ear. Some doors once opened cannot be closed again. But the dreams had called her here for a reason. The locket around her neck, the stone in her pouch, the spur in her bag, these things had found her, chosen her. She was meant to see what lay beyond that crooked door. Taking a deep breath, Little Girl stepped onto the warped wooden porch. The boards creaked beneath her weight, sound echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. The boundary stone grew so cold, it burned against her skin through the pouch. The locket pulsed with answering heat. At the threshold, she paused. Dark figures moved in her peripheral vision, not physical presences, but impressions, like memories given semi-substantial form. When she turned to look directly, they dissolved into ordinary shadows. "I am Tse-Iya of the Apache," she said, invoking her people's strength. "I do not fear what walks between worlds." With those words, she crossed the threshold into the cabin's waiting darkness. The cabin's interior was dimmer than expected, as if the sunlight weakened upon crossing the threshold. Little girl stood motionless, allowing her eyes to adjust while her other senses gathered information. The air inside carried a stale coldness and smelled of dust, old wood, and something else, a metallic tang reminiscent of blood. The main room contained the remnants of a settler family's life, frozen in the moment of abandonment. A table stood near the center, 3 wooden chairs neatly tucked in, a 4th overturned on the floor. Upon the table sat plates with remnants of a meal, beans and cornbread turned to dust, a child's cup still half filled with liquid that should have evaporated years ago. Little girl approached cautiously, her footsteps leaving clear prints in the thick dust. Yet when she glanced back, the prints were already fading, the dust resettling, as if unwilling to bear witness to her presence. Against the far wall stood a stone fireplace, its hearth cold, though a half-burned log rested inside. Beside it, a rocking chair moved slightly, creaking in rhythm like a heartbeat, despite the absence of wind or touch. Movement caught her eye. A spider scurrying across the wooden floorboards. It froze suddenly, trembled, then collapsed and withered before her eyes, its legs curling inward, as if centuries of decay had been compressed into seconds. The silver locket pulsed warm against her skin, seeming to guide her attention toward a low shelf beside the fireplace. There, among a collection of everyday items, candle stubs, a wooden pipe, mending tools, sat a small music box made of dark, polished wood inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Little girl approached it slowly. The box seemed out of place among the humble possessions, too fine, too delicate for frontier life. Her fingers hovered above it, feeling a subtle vibration in the air. When she finally touched the cool wood, a series of images flashed through her mind. A fair-haired woman winding the box each night. A young girl with solemn eyes, the same from the locket dancing to its melody. A man watching with increasing unease as music echoed through the cabin. The box's tiny key was missing, but as little girl's fingers brushed the lid, it opened of its own accord. Inside, a delicate mechanism of brass gears and a small cylinder studded with pins remained intact. Rather than a dancing figure that might be expected, the box contained a tiny mirror positioned to reflect the face of whoever opened it. In the mirror's surface, little girl saw not her own reflection, but the face of a pale child, eyes hollow with fear or hunger, lips moving in silent plea. The image lasted only a moment before dissolving into little girl's own startled expression. Without warning, the mechanism engaged. Music filled the cabin. A haunting melody played in minor key, each note hanging in the air longer than natural. The locket against little girl's chest grew painfully hot, while the boundary stone in her pouch turned cold enough to burn. She tried to close the music box, but found the lid fixed open. The melody continued, growing distorted, notes bending into unfamiliar tones no human instrument could produce. From the corners of the room, shadows deepened and shifted, gathering substance. Little girl stepped back, knife drawn. "Stop," she commanded in her native tongue. The music faltered momentarily, then resumed at a quicker tempo. The shadows retreated slightly, but remained at the edges of her vision, watchful and patient. Near the overturned chair, she noticed papers scattered across the floor. Moving carefully, she knelt to examine them. Most were everyday documents, property deeds, letters from relatives back east, a child's arithmetic exercises. One paper stood out, a page torn from a journal, the edges singed as if someone had attempted to burn it. The handwriting was hurried. Ink blotched in places. Nov, 18, found something while digging the root cellar. M says to leave it buried, but the voices are insistent. Promise of gold, of knowledge. Just need to go deeper. Children complaining of bad dreams. Music box won't stop playing even when unwound. Nove 20, breaking through tomorrow. M taking children to town. Told her I'd follow after. Forgive me for the lie. Some opportunities come once in a lifetime. The voices say I'm almost there. Just a little deeper and all will be revealed. Nove 21, God help us. It's coming up through. The entry ended abruptly, a long ink streak trailing off the page. Little girl folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her dress. As she did so, her eyes were drawn to an irregularity in the floor planking near the table. Boards that didn't quite match the others. Newer wood laid over old. The music box's melody changed again, becoming almost frantic as little girl moved toward the mismatched boards. The shadows at the room's edges seemed to pulse with the rhythm, contracting and expanding like a living thing breathing. Beneath the table, the outline of a trapdoor was barely visible in the floorboards. The music box's haunting melody slowed to a dirge-like pace as little girl knelt beside the mismatched floorboards. She ran her fingers along the edges of what was clearly a trapdoor, feeling for a latch or handle. The wood was smoother than it should have been, polished by frequent use. A small brass ring lay flush with the surface, nearly invisible in the dimming light. As the sun continued its descent outside, shadows inside the cabin grew longer, their edges becoming too defined. Too purposeful in their movements, little girl hesitated, remembering her grandfather's teachings about thresholds, doors between worlds that, once opened, allowed passage in both directions. The cabin itself was one such threshold. What might lie beneath was surely another, perhaps more dangerous. The locket around her neck pulsed with urgency, its heat intensifying. In contrast, the boundary stone had grown so cold that frost formed on the leather of the pouch containing it. Two forces pulling in opposite directions, with little girl caught between. Scattered across the floor were more personal items, a hairbrush with blonde strands still tangled in its bristles, a child's wooden top, a woman's shawl abandoned mid-fold. Each object seemed positioned as if its owner had simply vanished while using it. On a small side table near the window lay a leather-bound book with a tarnished clasp. The book was positioned too precisely, centered on the table, aligned with its edges, to have been discarded in haste. Someone had placed it deliberately for discovery. Little girl rose and approached the book. Unlike everything else in the cabin, it carried no dust. The leather cover was warm to the touch, the material softer and finer than any she had encountered before. When she lifted it, the weight shifted strangely, as if the contents rearranged themselves. The silver clasp opened at her touch. Inside were pages of varying sizes and materials, some fine paper, others parchment, the oldest appearing to be cured animal hide marked with pigments. Multiple handwritings filled these pages, in languages spanning centuries. The earliest entries were in Spanish, the ink faded to brown. Later passages appeared in English, the most recent dated just months ago. Little girl couldn't read the words, but the careful drawings throughout needed no translation. They depicted the same location across time. This valley, these red rocks, this very spot where the cabin now stood. Earlier drawings showed stone structures, perhaps a mission. Later sketches revealed the wooden cabin in various stages of construction, but what captured her attention were the drawings beneath the structures. Elaborate tunnels and chambers extending deep into the earth, centered around a large circular pit. The most detailed illustration labeled this El Pozo Sin Fondo, words little girl didn't understand, though their meaning felt ominous. Throughout the pages, a recurring symbol appeared, a spiral turning inward, the same design carved into the boundary stone she carried. Notes had been added by different hands over centuries, each observer adding to the accumulated knowledge. As she turned to the final pages, little girl found more recent entries in a careful, educated hand. April 12, 1879. Purchased the Jensen claim after the tragedy. Locals refused to discuss what happened. Apache guides abandoned me a mile from the property. The government man warned me off, but doubled his price when I insisted. April 30th, 1879. Found the old Spanish chronicles buried in the mission ruins. This place was sacred to the natives long before Europeans arrived. The first missionaries believed it a site of pagan worship and built their church atop it to sanctify the ground. Their records speak of strange occurrences, shadows moving independently, voices from the pit. Several brothers who went missing after descending into the old chambers. May 15th, 1879, Jensen's root cellar breaks through to much older tunnels. Remarkable preservation. Ancient symbols match those in the Spanish texts. The pit is real. Jensen went too far, too fast. I must be methodical where he was reckless. June 7th, 1879. Progress slow but steady. Reinforcing as I excavate. The voices have begun. Promising, seductive. I understand Jensen's obsession now. Something waits below. Something old beyond reckoning. The Apache legends speak truth. The shadow people are real, and they hunger. The final entry was dated 3 months ago, June 28th, 1879. I have secured the chamber door and withdrawn. The entity cannot be controlled as I hoped. Too powerful, too cunning. I have replaced the protective symbols Jensen destroyed. The music box serves as both lure and warning. If it plays unprompted, they are active. God help anyone who opens the way again. The pages that followed were blank, awaiting the next observer's notes. Little girl realized with growing dread that she was now part of this chronicle, another in a long line who had encountered what dwelled beneath the cabin. The music box's melody had stopped. In the silence that followed, the sound of the brass ring on the trapdoor, lifting slowly by itself, was unnaturally loud. Little girl leaped back as the trapdoor rose an inch and then stopped, as if testing her reaction. The brass ring settled back into place with a soft, metallic click. The cabin had fallen completely silent. Even the ambient sounds of the desert evening outside had vanished, creating an unnatural vacuum of sound. The sun must have set fully now, for darkness pressed against the windows. Yet little girl could still see clearly inside the cabin, illuminated by a diffuse glow that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere. She clutched the leather-bound chronicle to her chest, its warmth providing strange comfort. The silver locket around her neck had cooled, while the boundary stone in her pouch now felt merely cool rather than freezing. The opposing forces had reached some kind of equilibrium. "I need to see," little girl whispered, her words unnaturally loud in the silence. "Show me what's below." As if responding to her command, the trapdoor lifted again, rising slowly until it stood fully open, revealing a rectangle of absolute darkness. No light penetrated that void, not even the supernatural illumination filling the cabin. From the opening rose the scent of earth, of ancient stone, and beneath those something sharp and metallic. The chill emanating from below made the cabin's coldness seem warm by comparison. Little girl set the chronicle carefully on the table and approached the opening, knife drawn. The darkness below seemed to pulse with anticipation. She knelt at the edge, straining to see into the depths, but the darkness remained impenetrable. Her fingers brushed against something smooth and cold on the floor beside the opening. A glass lantern, its reservoir filled with oil, wick-trimmed and ready. A box of matches lay beside it, the kind traders brought from the east. Both items seemed newly placed, showing none of the dust that covered everything else. As she lifted the lantern, something fell from beneath it, a small wooden object carved into the shape of a coyote, the trickster figure from her people's stories. The carving was crude but powerful, made from mesquite wood and stained dark with what might have been blood. Tiny shards of obsidian had been pressed into the wood for eyes, giving it a predatory gleam. Little girl recognized the style immediately. This was Apache work, not settler craftsmanship. Someone from her tribe had been here before her, perhaps recently, and left this marker. When she picked up the carving, a flood of images rushed through her mind, a tribal scout discovering the cabin decades ago. His return to warn the elders, a ceremony to bind what dwelled below. Young warriors posted as sentinels season after season until settlers claimed the land. Her own grandfather as a young man, placing protective symbols that the Jensen man later removed. This place was known to her people, had been watched by them. The boundary stones had been their creation, placed to warn those who might stumble upon this thin place between worlds. The coyote carving grew warm in her hand, then hot, not burning but insistent, demanding attention. When she turned it over, she found symbols carved into its belly, patterns matching those in the chronicle. And on the boundary stone, this was no mere marker, but a key of sorts, a tool created through tribal medicine to interact with what dwelled in the darkness. Little girl struck a match and lit the lantern, its warm glow creating a small sphere of light that did little to penetrate the darkness below. Wooden steps descended into the earth, their surfaces worn smooth by repeated use. They appeared solid enough, though decades old. From below came a sound, not quite a voice, more a vibration felt than heard, rising up through the opening. It carried a sense of invitation, of secrets waiting to be revealed. The coyote carving pulsed rhythmically in her palm, matching the tempo of her heartbeat. Its obsidian eyes caught the lantern light, seeming to wink with secret knowledge. Little girl understood then that she was not the first of her tribe to stand at this threshold, nor would she be the last. Whatever dwelled below had been contained before, its influence limited by the vigilance of her people. The boundary stones, the protective symbols, all part of an ongoing effort spanning generations. The settlers had blundered in, ignorant of the danger, breaking ancient wards with their digging and building. The Jensen man had gone further, deliberately removing protections in his greed for what was promised from below. Now something waited in that darkness, patient, ancient, and hungry. The trapdoor's opening was an invitation she was meant to accept. Little girl tucked the coyote carving into her dress beside the locket and moved to the first step, lantern held high. The flame flickered as if in a breeze, though the air remained still. She took a deep breath and began her descent into the earth, counting each step aloud in her native tongue, a small ritual of courage. The trapdoor closed behind her, with quiet finality on the count of 13. The stairs descended deeper than little girl expected, curving gently to the right as they followed the natural contours of the earth. Her lantern cast dancing shadows on walls that transitioned from the rough-hewn wood of the settler's cellar to something much older, stone, blocks fitted together with precision no modern mason could achieve. The air grew increasingly cold and dense, pressing against her skin like a physical weight. Each breath condensed into a small cloud before her face. The silence was absolute, except for her footsteps and breathing. At the bottom of the stairs, little girl found herself in a small antechamber. The settlers' excavation had broken through the ceiling of what appeared to be a much older structure, perhaps the Spanish mission mentioned in the chronicle, or something predating even that. The stone walls were covered with symbols, some she recognized from her tribe's sacred teachings, others resembling the Spanish crosses, and still more in patterns she had never seen before. All had been carefully carved by human hands, layer upon layer added over centuries. In the center of the chamber stood a stone pedestal waist-high to an adult. Its surface was polished smooth from apparent use, the stone basin shaped with channels leading to a central depression. Little girl didn't need her grandfather's wisdom to recognize an altar when she saw one. Upon the altar's surface lay a single feather, large and black with an iridescent blue-green sheen when it caught the light. A raven's feather, though larger than any she had ever seen. It appeared freshly placed with none of the dust that coated the surrounding stone. Little girl approached cautiously, lantern held high. Unlike everything else she'd encountered in the cabin and below, the feather provoked no visions, no sensations of heat or cold. It simply existed, mundane in its materiality, yet out of place in these depths. When she touched it, the feather felt ordinary. Soft barbs, hollow shaft, slightly flexible. She lifted it, examining it more closely in the lantern light, and noticed a small symbol burned into the shaft, a spiral matching the one on her boundary stone. "A gift, or a test," she whispered. From the darkness beyond the antechamber came a sound like soft laughter, neither human nor animal, but something between. The coyote carving in her dress warmed in response. Little girl tucked the feather carefully behind her ear, securing it in her hair. The moment she did so, her vision altered slightly. Shadows receded, details sharpened, and faint pathways of light became visible along the floor. Tracing patterns only partially visible to normal sight. 3 doorways led from the antechamber, one directly ahead and 2 flanking it. The central passage was larger, its lintel carved with elaborate symbols of warning and prohibition. The flanking passages were smaller, their details obscured by shadows, despite her enhanced vision. The paths of light on the floor led to the left-hand passage. Little girl approached it, noting that unlike the central doorway, its frame bore symbols of guidance and protection. A memory surfaced, her grandfather speaking of spirit walking, of journeys below the earth, where travelers must choose between paths of power and paths of wisdom. "The loudest voice is rarely the one worth heeding," he had told her. "The true path often lies to the side, humble and undemanding." As if confirming her thoughts, a whisper emerged from the central passage, seductive promises of gold, of power, of knowledge beyond mortal understanding. The voice spoke in multiple languages simultaneously, somehow comprehensible, despite its impossibility. The coyote carving grew almost painfully hot against her skin. The wooden figure was a warning then, alerting her to deception. The central path was meant to appeal to human greed, to desires that could be exploited. Little girl turned resolutely to the left passage. As she approached, symbols along its frame began to glow faintly with blue-white light. The raven feather behind her ear vibrated slightly as if in approval. Before entering, she reached into her pouch and removed the boundary stone, now merely cool to the touch rather than freezing. Following an instinct she didn't fully understand, she placed it in the central depression of the altar. The stone settled with a soft click, fitting perfectly as if made for this purpose. The moment it connected, all the symbols in the antechamber flared briefly with light. From the central passage came a hiss of frustration or anger, quickly silenced. Little girl understood that she had activated some ancient mechanism, restored a protection that had been removed or damaged. The boundary stone had been more than a warning marker. It was a key component in whatever system her ancestors had created to contain what dwelled below. "I walk the path of my grandfathers," she said in her native tongue, stepping into the left-hand passage. The lantern light revealed a narrow tunnel extending deep into the earth, its walls covered with the history of her people told in sacred pictographs. Behind her, the altar began to glow with soft blue light, illuminating the chamber she had left. Before her, the tunnel waited, promising answers to questions she had not yet formed. The tunnel narrowed as little girl proceeded, the ceiling lowering until she had to stoop slightly. The stone walls were smooth from countless hands, touching them over centuries, worn like river rocks, polished by endless water. The pictographs became more elaborate the deeper she went, telling a story that unfolded with each step. Her enhanced vision, granted by the raven feather, allowed her to see details that would otherwise be invisible. The images depicted her people arriving in this land long ago, discovering the thin place where shadows had substance, and learning to contain what dwelled beneath rather than destroy it. For some things could not be destroyed, only bound. The air grew colder still, though strangely fresh rather than stale, as might be expected so far underground. A faint breeze carried scents. Little girl couldn't identify herbs and minerals, with no names in her language, after what seemed like hours, but might have been minutes. Time felt distorted in this place. The tunnel widened into a small circular chamber, Unlike the antechamber above with its altar, this space was clearly meant for observation. Stone benches lined the curved walls, and in the center stood a pedestal supporting a strange device. Little girl approached cautiously, lantern held high. The device consisted of a copper basin filled with what appeared to be quicksilver, its surface perfectly still despite the subtle air currents. Suspended above the liquid metal was an intricate arrangement of thin copper wires, crystals and small mirrors, all balanced with impossible precision. When her lantern light struck the device, the crystals scattered rainbows across the chamber walls, and the mirrors reflected light in patterns matching the pictographs in the tunnel. The quicksilver remained unnaturally still, its surface reflecting the apparatus above it with perfect clarity. Little girl had never seen anything like it. This was not Apache craftsmanship, nor Spanish nor settler technology. It appeared both ancient and somehow beyond the capabilities of any civilization she knew. As she stood transfixed, a single drop of water fell from the ceiling, striking the quicksilver surface. Rather than causing ripples, the liquid metal absorbed the water instantly, and the entire apparatus began to vibrate at a frequency just below hearing, felt rather than heard. The mirrors rotated slightly, catching and redirecting the lantern light. On the far wall, the scattered beams coalesced into a map, a perfect representation of the tunnels and chambers beneath the cabin. Extending far deeper than little girl had yet ventured, one chamber deep below pulsed with a red light. Around it, smaller chambers appeared to be sealed with symbols matching those she had seen on the boundary stone and throughout the tunnels. The map revealed a vast complex, far larger than seemed possible. While studying the projection, little girl nearly missed the small object that had materialized in the copper basin. The quicksilver had parted around it, forming a perfect circle of bare metal where none should exist. She set her lantern down and carefully extracted the object, a copper disc the size of her palm, warm despite the chamber's chill. One side bore the now familiar spiral symbol, but the other featured a detailed engraving of a face, neither human nor animal but something between, with eyes that seemed to follow her movements. The moment she lifted the disc, the quicksilver in the basin began to move, swirling counterclockwise into a miniature whirlpool. The mirrors and crystals adjusted themselves, and the projected map shifted to highlight a specific path through the tunnels, a route that avoided the pulsing red chamber and led instead to a blue-tinged space deep. Below, the copper disc grew warmer in her hand, not painfully so, but insistent. The coyote carving in her dress and the feather behind her ear seemed to respond, creating a triangle of heat points on her body, guidance from 3 separate sources, all indicating the same direction. Little girl understood that she had been given a key and a map. The disc was not merely a marker but a tool, something that would grant access to places otherwise sealed. The projected route showed her where to go while avoiding whatever was contained in the red chamber. A soft chime sounded from the apparatus, and the quicksilver stilled once more. The projection faded, but little girl had memorized the path. She tucked the copper disc into her medicine pouch alongside the coyote carving, where the 2 artifacts nestled together as if made to be paired. The exit from this chamber was not immediately obvious until she held the lantern higher. A narrow opening in the ceiling revealed another passage leading downward at a gentle slope. A crude ladder of ancient wood and sinew provided access. Before climbing, little girl examined the quicksilver basin once more. The liquid metal now displayed an image of the cabin above, where shadows moved with purpose through the rooms, searching. They congregated around the trapdoor, probing for weaknesses in whatever seal had been activated when she placed the boundary stone on the altar. Time was not on her side. Whatever dwelled here knew of her presence and was working to cut off her return path. Little girl extinguished her lantern. The raven feathers enhancement would have to guide her vision now, and began to climb the ladder into darkness. The ladder descended, into absolute darkness, yet little girl could see not with normal vision, but through a strange perception granted by the raven feather. Surfaces glowed with faint luminescence, revealing handholds and the next rung below. The copper disc in her medicine pouch pulsed with warmth, guiding her downward like a compass pointing true north. She climbed carefully, testing each ancient rung before trusting it with her weight. The wood creaked but held firm, preserved by the cool, dry air of the underground complex. After what seemed an endless descent, her feet touched solid ground again. This new passage differed dramatically from those above. The walls were perfectly smooth, almost glassy, as if melted and resolidified. They emitted a faint blue phosphorescence that intensified as she moved deeper. No pictographs adorned these surfaces. Whoever or whatever had created this tunnel had no need for written records. The coyote carving grew cooler against her skin, while the copper disc's warmth increased. The two artifacts appeared to be responding to each other, creating a balance of sensation that helped little girl navigate. When she veered from the path shown on the projected map, the coyote grew colder and the disc hotter, urging correction. After walking for several minutes, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber that took her breath away. The ceiling soared beyond sight, the blue glow insufficient to illuminate its heights. Perfectly cylindrical columns of the same glassy material supported what she could see of the structure, each etched with spiral patterns that seemed to move when viewed peripherally. In the chamber's center stood what little girl first mistook for a tree, an enormous crystalline structure that branched upward and outward. Unlike the blue glowing walls, this formation shimmered with all colors simultaneously, casting prismatic reflections throughout the space. At its base, the crystal structure emerged from a pool of liquid that resembled the quicksilver from the observation chamber, but darker and more viscous. Little girl approached cautiously. The liquid in the pool moved in response to her proximity, forming ripples that traveled toward rather than away from her. The crystal tree emitted a soft harmonic tone that changed pitch as she circled it. Near the pool's edge lay an object that seemed deliberately placed, a small obsidian knife with a handle wrapped in what appeared to be human hair of various colors twisted into an intricate pattern. The blade gleamed with unnatural sharpness despite its obvious age. When little girl knelt to examine it, reflections in the crystal tree shifted to show faces, dozens of them from different eras and cultures. Indigenous people with paint and feathers, Spanish explorers with bearded faces and wide-brimmed hats, settlers in rough frontier clothing. Each visage appeared briefly before dissolving into the next, all watching her with expressions ranging from warning to pleading. She understood then that this knife had been used by many before her, each adding to its power through blood and intent. It was both tool and record, storing the experiences of all who wielded it. The copper disc in her pouch now burned against her skin, demanding attention. When she removed it, the engraved face on its surface had changed, now resembling her own features, though still not fully human. The disc pulled toward the crystal tree with magnetic intensity. Following its guidance, little girl approached the pool's edge. The liquid parted before her, revealing a small depression in the stone, exactly matching the disc's dimensions. She hesitated, remembering her grandfather's warnings about exchanges with the spirit world. Nothing was given freely. Every gift required payment. The obsidian knife suddenly made terrible sense. Previous visitors had paid with blood for whatever knowledge or power they sought. As if confirming her thoughts, the faces in the crystal flickered more rapidly, some showing wounds self-inflicted with the very knife that lay before her. The price of communion with whatever intelligence dwelled here. Little girl's hand moved to her father's knife, still secure at her waist. She could turn back now, return to the surface with the knowledge she had gained without paying this price. The boundary stone on the altar above had already strengthened the containment. Perhaps that was all she had been meant to do, but the silver locket pulsed against her chest, reminding her of the Jensen family who had not escaped. The faces of children flickered in the crystal, including the solemn-eyed girl from the locket's portrait. They remained trapped somehow, their essence held in this place. The raven feather behind her ear grew suddenly cold, while a new warmth blossomed in her mind, a presence ancient and watchful, neither malevolent nor benevolent, but simply other. It carried a sense of evaluation, of testing. Little girl understood that she faced a crucial choice. The obsidian knife offered one path, communion through sacrifice. But the copper disc suggested another possibility, a key rather than a blade. Access without the price of blood. She made her decision, reaching for one of the artifacts with steady hands. Little girl reached for the copper disc, rejecting the obsidian knife and its demand for blood. As her decision crystallized, the knife skittered away as if pushed by invisible hands, disappearing into the darkness beyond the pool's edge. She placed the copper disc into the stone depression. It settled with a soft click, then began to sink slowly, the stone closing over it like water accepting a pebble. From the crystal tree came a harmonious resonance that vibrated through her bones. The dark liquid in the pool stilled completely, becoming a perfect mirror that reflected not the chamber around them, but someplace else, a vast, starless void populated by moving shadows. The shadows noticed her observation and turned toward her reflection, reaching with limbs that weren't quite arms, moving with a fluidity that suggested they weren't bound by physical laws. One shadow separated from the others, approaching the surface from the other side. Unlike its companions, this entity had definition, a suggestion of features that shifted between human, animal, and something entirely other. It pressed against the liquid mirror, creating a bulge that rose toward little girl. The coyote carving burst from her dress of its own accord, clattering onto the stone floor between her and the pool. It began to change, the crude wooden figure expanding and taking on substance until a real coyote stood before her, small but perfectly formed, its obsidian eyes reflecting the crystal's prismatic light. The coyote growled, the sound echoing with greater volume than its small form should produce. The bulge in the pool receded slightly. "You walk between worlds, little one," the coyote spoke, its mouth not moving but the words clear in her mind. "You have chosen wisely so far. Blood is the easy path, the quick exchange. Your ancestors knew better." The shadow pressed forward again, the liquid mirror bulging upward once more. This time, it began to take shape, coalescing into a form that resembled the Jensen man from the locket's portrait. Its features were blurred, but the resemblance was unmistakable. "Child," it spoke with a voice like stones grinding together, "I can give you what you seek, knowledge, power, the secrets of all things. Just reach out your hand to me." The false Jensen extended what might have been an arm, its surface rippling with barely contained darkness. The liquid mirror thinned where it pressed, the barrier between worlds weakening. Little girl stepped back, remembering her grandfather's teachings about trickster spirits who wore familiar faces to deceive. The coyote, itself a trickster in her people's stories, now stood as her protector against a greater deception. "I seek only to understand, and to protect those who come after me," she replied. Her voice steady despite her fear. The shadow being's form shimmered with what might have been anger. The liquid mirror bulged dramatically, the barrier stretching dangerously thin. The coyote barked sharply, then spoke again in her mind. The disc was the first key. "You must use what has been given to complete the binding." Little girl's hand went to the silver locket around her neck. It had grown hot again, pulsing in time with the crystal tree's harmonics. The raven feather behind her ear vibrated with the same rhythm. She removed the locket, holding it before her. Within the small silver oval, the portrait of the solemn-eyed girl seemed to move, the painted lips forming words little girl couldn't hear. Understanding came to her then. The locket wasn't merely a keepsake, but a container, a vessel holding something of the Jensen child's essence. Not her soul, but perhaps an impression, a fragment preserved when the rest had been taken by the shadow beings. The false Jensen's form wavered, its attention fixed on the locket with terrible hunger. The coyote positioned itself between them, hackles raised. "Place it on the crystal," the coyote directed. "Not as sacrifice, but as restoration." Little girl approached the crystal tree, the locket extended before her. Where the copper disc had been consumed by stone, the crystal welcomed the locket differently, a section of the trunk softening, becoming transparent and revealing a hollow space within. She placed the silver oval into the depression. The crystal flowed around it, securing it in place. The moment it was fully encased, a pulse of white light shot upward through the branches, illuminating the entire chamber. From the pool came a sound of fury, the shadow being's disguise falling away to reveal its true form. A writhing mass of darkness rose from the liquid mirror, no longer restrained by its surface. "You've done it now," the coyote said, its form beginning to fade. "The binding is broken. It comes." The shadow erupted fully from the pool, towering to the unseen ceiling. Within its amorphous form, little girl glimpsed faces. The Jensen family, Spanish missionaries, indigenous people, and countless others consumed over centuries. But before the entity could advance, something new emerged from the crystal tree, a humanoid shape formed of pure light, small and delicate. The Jensen girl stepped forth, her form translucent, but growing more substantial with each moment. She turned to little girl, her expression solemn but determined. From her outstretched hand fell a small object that clattered at little girl's feet, a silver key, ancient and ornate, its surface covered with symbols matching those throughout the tunnels. Little girl snatched up the silver key, its metal warm and vibrating with energy. The shadow entity towered above them, a writhing mass of darkness that seemed to absorb the chamber's blue glow wherever it reached. "Run!" the spectral Jensen girl commanded, her voice echoing like distant bells. "I can hold it only briefly. Follow the path of light." The crystal tree pulsed with increasing brightness, sending beams of radiance through the chamber that seared the shadow being wherever they touched. It recoiled with a sound like tearing fabric, momentarily retreating toward the pool. Little girl hesitated, unwilling to abandon the child's spirit after freeing her. "Go!" the girl insisted. "I am already lost. The others can still be saved. The key will show you." The coyote nudged little girl's leg, urging her toward a narrow passage that had appeared in the chamber wall, illuminated by the crystal's light. With a final glance at the Jensen girl, now standing with arms outstretched, light pouring from her translucent form to hold back the darkness, little girl ran. The passage twisted sharply, descending deeper than she had yet ventured. Behind her came sounds of conflict, light against shadow, the ancient battle playing out once more, with the Jensen child as vessel for whatever power the crystal tree contained. The silver key grew warmer in little girl's hand, pulling her forward like a lodestone seeking north. The raven feather behind her ear enhanced her vision, revealing symbols carved into the passage walls that would otherwise be invisible. A continuous line of script in no language she recognized. Glowing faintly blue, the coyote loped ahead, occasionally looking back to ensure she followed. "Hurry!" its voice urged in her mind. The child light cannot hold the shadow eater for long. The passage ended abruptly at a circular door of solid stone, its surface carved with concentric rings of symbols. In the very center was a keyhole shaped like a spiral. Without hesitation, little girl inserted the silver key. It entered smoothly, despite the apparent mismatch in shapes, the metal flowing and conforming to the spiral pattern. She turned it clockwise, feeling resistance as ancient mechanisms engaged. The stone door sank inward and then rolled aside, revealing a chamber that took her breath away. Unlike the rough-hewn tunnels and ancient stonework above, this space appeared impossibly advanced. Smooth walls of unknown material that emitted soft golden light. Geometric patterns that shifted and moved across the surfaces. Air that felt somehow cleaner and more invigorating than even the mountain springs of her homeland. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal supporting a crystal pyramid about the size of her two hands together. The pyramid contained what appeared to be a miniature storm, swirling clouds, tiny lightning flashes, and at its heart, a pulsating core of absolute blackness that somehow did not diminish the light around it. The moment she entered, the pyramid activated, projecting images onto the walls, star patterns, landscapes she didn't recognize, and most importantly, the tunnel complex rendered in perfect detail. Red dots moved through the tunnels, shadow entities searching, while a blue light pulsed in the chamber she had just fled, gradually dimming. The vessel of containment, the coyote explained, sitting on its haunches beside the pedestal. Created long before my people or yours walked these lands, the Shadow Eaters found a thin place between worlds and began to cross over. The Old Ones built this to trap them. Little girl approached the pyramid cautiously. How does it work? It doesn't, the coyote replied. Not anymore. The binding weakens with each passage of the sun. The Shadow Eaters have been escaping one by one for centuries, despite the efforts of those who came to strengthen the seals. From a hidden compartment in the pedestal emerged a small object, a circular stone amulet on a leather cord, carved with symbols matching those on the pyramid's base. The amulet rose into the air of its own accord, hovering before little girl. The final key, the coyote said. It must be returned to its place in the chamber above, where the crystal tree stands. The tree is the true heart of the binding, not this mechanism. The Shadow Eaters have been trying to destroy it for millennia. Little girl reached for the amulet. As her fingers closed around it, knowledge flowed into her mind. Images of the original builders, their advanced civilization, their discovery of the Shadow Realm, their desperate work to contain what they had unwittingly released. The amulet showed her the complete binding ritual, steps performed across multiple chambers, symbols that must be reactivated, words that must be spoken in a language long dead. Most crucially, it revealed the true purpose of the obsidian knife she had rejected, not for sacrifice of blood, but for severing the connection between worlds once the shadows were driven back. The Jensen man broke the sequence, the coyote explained. He removed the amulet thinking it valuable, not understanding its purpose. Without it, the binding began to fail. A tremor shook the chamber, dust falling from the ceiling. On the projected map, the blue light representing the Jensen girl winked out, and the red dots converged, moving rapidly toward their location. We have little time, the coyote warned. The child light is extinguished. The Shadow Eaters come. Little girl placed the amulet around her neck, feeling its weight settle against her chest. The pyramid's projection shifted, highlighting a different path back to the surface, longer but unoccupied by the searching shadows. I need the knife, she realized aloud. The one I rejected. The coyote's obsidian eyes gleamed. Yes, the final cut must be made. But first, we must return to the crystal tree and restore the amulet to its place. Another tremor, stronger this time. The golden light flickered momentarily. They know what you carry, the coyote said. They will do anything to stop you. Little girl studied the projected map, memorizing the alternative route. The path would lead them through chambers they hadn't yet encountered, circumventing the areas where shadow entities searched. We must move quickly, the coyote urged. Once the pyramid is deactivated, they will sense the change. Little girl approached the crystal device, instinctively knowing what must be done. She removed the raven feather from behind her ear and touched it to the pyramid's apex. The miniature storm inside intensified briefly, then settled into a slower rhythm. The projections dimmed but remained visible, enough guidance without broadcasting their presence so strongly. As they left the chamber, the stone door sealed behind them with a soft hiss. The passage beyond was different from the others, angular rather than curved, with surfaces that seemed almost metallic. This was their first outpost, the coyote explained as they hurried along. The Old Ones built these tunnels before your people or mine walked this land. They discovered the thin place by accident during their search for what they called world gates. Little girl touched the stone amulet at her neck. They weren't human, not as you would understand it. They were travelers between stars. The passage opened into a chamber filled with alcoves, each containing seated figures. Little girl gasped, thinking them living beings, but the coyote shook its head. "Guardians," it said. "Once alive, now vessels of purpose." The figures were humanoid, but not human. Taller, thinner, with elongated features and skin that seemed to shimmer with a faint metallic quality. Each wore identical robes, with symbols matching those on the amulet. Their eyes were closed, hands positioned in gestures of warding. In the center of the chamber stood what appeared to be a weapons rack, though most positions were empty. One slot contained a slender rod of silver-white metal. It hummed faintly, resonating with the amulet around little girl's neck. "The wand of binding," the coyote said. "Take it, it works in conjunction with the knife." Little girl lifted the rod carefully. Despite its metallic appearance, it felt warm and almost soft, molding slightly to her grip. Symbols illuminated along its length as she held it, and a subtle vibration passed through her arm. "It remembers," the coyote observed. Even after all this time, another tremor shook the chamber, stronger than before. Dust and small fragments of stone fell from the ceiling. The seated figures remained motionless, but little girl had the unsettling feeling they were aware of her presence. "They're breaking through the upper chambers," the coyote warned. "The binding grows weaker with each passing moment." They continued through a door on the far side, emerging into a passage that spiraled upward. The wand in little girl's hand pulsed with increasing urgency, guiding them like a compass. "What happened to them?" she asked as they climbed. "The old ones? They left," the coyote replied. "After containing the shadow eaters, they realized the danger was too great. They abandoned this outpost, leaving guardians and mechanisms to maintain the binding. They taught your ancestors how to monitor and repair the seals before departing." The spiral passage ended at a small chamber with multiple exits. On the wall hung a tarnished metal disc that might once have been a mirror. Now its surface was cloudy, showing only indistinct shapes. As little girl passed, the mirror suddenly cleared, revealing not her reflection, but the cabin above. Shadows filled the rooms, moving with purpose, searching. They converged around the trap door, probing for a way to break the seal. "They cannot pass the boundary stone you placed," the coyote assured her. "But they sense the amulet and know what you intend." The mirror shifted focus, showing the chamber with the crystal tree. The pool of dark liquid now boiled with activity, shadowy forms rising and falling like sea creatures breaching for air. The tree itself pulsed weakly, its light diminished. "The obsidian knife," little girl remembered. "We need to find it." The mirror responded to her words, its surface rippling before revealing the knife's location. It had fallen into a crevice near the pool's edge, partially hidden by crystalline growths. "I'll have to get close to the pool," she realized with dread. "Yes," the coyote confirmed, "but you won't face the shadow eaters unarmed now." The wand in her hand flared brightly, as if emphasizing the point. Little girl felt its power, ancient, purposeful, and somehow alive with intelligence. "There's more you haven't told me," she said to the coyote, as they selected the passage that would lead them back toward the crystal chamber. "Much more," it agreed. "But knowledge, like light, is best measured in safe portions. Too much at once can blind as surely as darkness." The raven feather tucked in her hair suddenly grew cold. Ahead, the passage darkened as something moved to block the ambient light. The coyote tensed. "They've found another way around." "Ready the wand." Little girl raised the metal rod as a shadow form coalesced before them, larger and more substantial than those she had seen before. Within its writhing darkness, faces formed and dissolved, human and not human. Some recognizable from the crystal's visions, others alien and disturbing. The wand's light intensified, throwing the entity's form into sharp relief. It hesitated, then began to retreat. "It fears the wand," little girl realized. "We can pass, for now," the coyote cautioned. "But it will return with others." The shadows learned quickly. The shadow entity retreated before the wand's light, but little girl could sense its reluctance, not true fear, but strategic withdrawal. It hovered at the edge of the wand's influence, studying them, learning. It's testing the boundaries, the coyote warned. We must hurry before it summons others. They advanced cautiously, little girl holding the wand before her like a torch. Its light pushed the darkness back, but couldn't banish it completely. The shadow kept pace at a distance, occasionally probing forward only to recoil when the wand flared. The passage began to look familiar as they approached the crystal chamber. The blue phosphorescence of the walls grew stronger, and the air carried the metallic scent little girl remembered. At a junction where 3 tunnels met, the coyote suddenly froze. "Wait," it commanded. "Something's wrong." Little girl halted, listening. At first, she heard nothing beyond her own breathing, but gradually became aware of a subtle vibration through the stone floor. Rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, but irregular. "The guardians are moving," the coyote said, its voice tense. "They only awaken in times of great danger." From the tunnel to their right came a sound of stone sliding against stone. Little girl raised the wand, its light revealing a figure approaching, one of the seated guardians she had seen earlier, now animate and walking with fluid grace despite its apparently stone-like composition. Unlike the shadows, the guardian didn't shy away from the wand's light. It regarded them with eyes that glowed with inner fire, its elongated face impassive. It carried a crystalline sphere in its outstretched hands. "Do not fear," the coyote advised. "It recognizes the amulet and wand. It comes to help." The guardian stopped before them, bowing its head slightly. When it spoke, the words weren't sounds but impressions forming directly in little girl's mind. The binding fractures. The shadows gather. The final protocol is initiated. It extended the crystal sphere toward little girl. Unlike the pyramid device or the crystal tree, this orb was perfectly clear, with no internal structures or movements. It appeared to be solid crystal, yet when little girl accepted it, the sphere felt hollow and impossibly light. "Vessel of essence," the guardian communicated. "Gather what remains of those taken. Return them to the source when the binding is renewed." "A soul catcher," the coyote translated, though little girl had understood the meaning. "It can retrieve fragments of those consumed by the shadows." The guardian inclined its head once more, then turned its attention to the shadow entity that had been following them. It raised one hand, fingers splayed in a gesture that reminded little girl of her grandfather when he dispelled negative energies. The shadow recoiled dramatically, fleeing back down the passage with a sound like tearing silk. The guardian lowered its hand and addressed little girl again. "Our strength wanes with each cycle. The outpost falls. You carry the means of renewal, child of the later ones. Complete the sequence. Seal the breach." Without waiting for a response, the guardian turned and walked back the way it had come, its movements precise and deliberate. Little girl watched until it disappeared into the darkness. "We've been granted a powerful tool," the coyote said, nodding toward the crystal sphere. "And time, though not much." Little girl examined the sphere, turning it in her hands. Though it appeared solid, she could sense empty space within, waiting to be filled. The guardian's purpose became clear. This device would allow her to rescue those trapped within the shadows, separating their essences from the entities that had consumed them. They continued toward the crystal chamber, moving more swiftly now that the shadow had been driven away. The vibrations through the floor increased, and distant sounds echoed through the tunnels, stone moving, crystalline structures resonating. The awakening of long-dormant mechanisms. "The final protocol," little girl said. "What does it mean?" "The guardians prepare for the possibility of failure," the coyote replied grimly. "If the binding cannot be restored, they will collapse the entire complex, sealing everything within, including us." The implications were clear. They had limited time not just to evade the shadows, but to complete their task before the guardians determined the situation unsalvageable. As they approached the final bend before the crystal chamber, little girl slowed. The amulet at her neck had grown cold, while the wand pulsed with erratic light. Both artifacts were reacting to something ahead. "They've gathered at the pool," the coyote whispered. All of them. They know what we intend. Little girl peered carefully around the corner. The crystal chamber was transformed. The tree at its center still stood, but its light had dimmed to barely a flicker. The pool of dark liquid had expanded, covering nearly half the chamber floor. Above it hovered dozens of shadow entities of varying sizes, their forms merging and separating in constant flux. Near the pool's edge, partially hidden by an outcropping of crystal growth, lay the obsidian knife, exactly where the mirror had shown it. Between them and the knife stretched an open space with no cover, fully visible to the assembled shadows. "I need a distraction," little girl whispered, clutching the crystal sphere in one hand and the wand in the other. The coyote's form began to shimmer and change, growing more substantial, more present. "The guardians have granted us time. I shall grant us opportunity." Before little girl could protest, the coyote leapt into the chamber, its form expanding until it stood as large as a bear. Blazing within a light that rivaled the wand's glow, it let out a howl that echoed through the chamber with impossible volume. Every shadow entity turned towards this new threat, momentarily forgetting the smaller presence at the tunnel entrance. The coyote's distraction worked perfectly. Shadow entities converged on the glowing animal, their forms stretching and twisting as they attempted to surround it. The coyote danced between them, its light burning wherever it touched the darkness, causing the shadows to recoil with silent screams. Little girl didn't waste the opportunity. Staying low, she darted into the chamber, skirting the edge of the expanded pool. The stone floor felt unnaturally cold beneath her feet, and the air grew thicker as she approached the obsidian knife's location. She reached the crystal outcropping and spotted the knife wedged in a narrow crevice. Its black blade seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, the edge impossibly sharp. The handle's wrapping of human hair had expanded, the strands moving slightly as if alive. Little girl hesitated, remembering the knife's bloody history. But the amulet at her neck pulsed with reassurance, while the wand in her hand flickered with encouraging light. She tucked the crystal sphere into her dress and reached for the blade. The moment her fingers touched the handle, visions flooded her mind, hundreds of hands holding this same knife across millennia, using it for purposes both sacred and profane. Some had understood its true purpose. Others had been corrupted by its power, using it to harm rather than heal the breach between worlds. She pulled the knife free, its weight settling into her grip with disturbing familiarity. The hair wrapping untwined slightly, a single strand reaching to touch her wrist before settling back around the handle. Across the chamber, the coyote's light was dimming as shadow entities swarmed around it. Though it fought valiantly, the sheer number of opponents was overwhelming. Little girl knew she had moments at most before they noticed her presence. She turned toward the crystal tree, now barely glowing at all. Its once vibrant branches had dulled to ashen gray. The colors faded. The amulet around her neck pulled toward it with magnetic intensity. A shadow detached from the mass, attacking the coyote, turning toward her. It hesitated, then gestured to its companions. One by one they abandoned the coyote, reforming into a wall of darkness between little girl and the crystal tree. The coyote lay on the stone floor, its light flickering weakly. "Complete the sequence," it called, voice faint but determined. "I will recover." Little girl assessed her options. The direct path to the tree was blocked, but the shadows were focusing on her, ignoring the pool behind them. The dark liquid had calmed during the confrontation, its surface now mirror-smooth. An idea formed, desperate and dangerous, but possibly their only chance. Little girl raised the wand high, its light flaring brilliantly. The shadows recoiled momentarily, creating a small gap in their formation. Instead of rushing toward the tree as they might have expected, little girl dove sideways, directly into the pool of dark liquid. She anticipated cold, perhaps resistance, but not what actually happened. The moment she broke the surface, gravity seemed to reverse. She fell upward into limitless darkness, the liquid closing over her with no sensation of wetness. The wand's light contracted to a tiny sphere around her hand, barely illuminating her own body. Around her in the darkness, shapes moved. Not the shadow entities from the chamber, but something else. Geometric patterns formed and dissolved, structures too complex for her mind to fully comprehend. She was seeing the architecture of the space between worlds, the thin place itself. From her dress, the crystal sphere began to glow with its own light. It rose of its own accord, hovering before her. Within its clear depths, pinpoints of light appeared, dozens, then hundreds of tiny stars, the essences of those taken, a voice whispered, not the coyotes or the guardians, but somehow familiar. They await liberation. Little girl understood. She had entered the shadow realm itself, where the consumed souls were imprisoned. This was why the obsidian knife had been created, not to spill blood, but to cut through the fabric between worlds, to sever connections permanently once the souls were rescued. The crystal sphere pulsed, drawing the pinpoints of light toward it. They swirled around the orb, gradually being absorbed into its structure. As each light entered, little girl caught glimpses of faces, the Jensen family, Spanish missionaries, indigenous people, and others unknown, their expressions changing from torment to peace, but her intrusion had not gone unnoticed. Through the darkness came larger shapes, ancient presences far more powerful than the shadow entities in the chamber above. These were the source, the original shadows that had first found the thin place and sought to cross over. They moved toward her with terrible purpose, their forms so alien that her mind couldn't properly process what she was seeing. The wand's light faltered against such profound darkness. Little girl clutched the obsidian knife tightly. The handle's hair wrapping tightened around her wrist, anchoring the blade to her grip. From the knife came a whispered instruction, the accumulated knowledge of all who had wielded it before. Cut a door. Not a tear, but a doorway. Form it in your mind first, then make it real with the blade. She concentrated, visualizing a perfect arch leading back to the crystal chamber, specifically to the base of the tree. The knife grew warm in her hand, the blade extending slightly as if eager to serve its purpose. With a single, fluid motion, little girl swept the knife through the darkness before her. It passed through the void with no resistance, yet left behind a line of silver light hanging in the emptiness. She completed the arch with a second cut, connecting back to the starting point. Within the arch, an image formed, the crystal chamber viewed from the pool's edge. The coyote had regained its feet and was holding the shadow entities at bay with the last of its strength. The crystal tree stood just beyond, waiting. The doorway hung suspended in the void, a perfect arch of silver light showing the crystal chamber beyond. Behind little girl, the ancient shadow entities closed in, their presence distorting the very fabric of the space between worlds. The crystal sphere in her hand had absorbed hundreds of light points, souls trapped for centuries, and now pulsed with their combined essence. Little girl stepped through the arch without hesitation. The transition felt like passing through a sheet of ice that shattered and reformed behind her. She emerged at the edge of the pool in the crystal chamber, directly beside the weakened tree. The coyote's eyes widened with surprise at her appearance. "Clever child," it managed, still holding the shadow entities at bay, though clearly exhausted. The knife in little girl's hand vibrated urgently, while the amulet at her neck pulled powerfully toward the crystal tree. She understood what needed to be done. Placing the crystal sphere, now glowing brilliantly with captured souls, at the base of the tree, she removed the amulet and sought the place where it belonged. Near the tree's lowest branches, a small depression matched the amulet's dimensions perfectly. Little girl pressed the stone disc into place, where it settled with a satisfying click. Immediately, energy surged through the tree, its crystalline branches brightening. The shadow entities shrieked, a sound like glass breaking multiplied 100-fold. They backed away from the coyote, their attention now fully on little girl and the increasingly luminous tree. "The sequence," the coyote called. "Complete it before they recover!" Little girl raised the wand in her left hand, the obsidian knife in her right. The two artifacts resonated with each other, creating a harmonic vibration that made the air between them shimmer with potential. Words formed in her mind, not in her language or any human tongue, but somehow perfectly comprehensible. She began to recite the ancient binding, her voice gaining strength with each syllable. The crystal tree responded, its glow pulsating in rhythm with her words. The knife and wand moved in her hands, guiding her through precise gestures that traced patterns in the air, the same symbols she had seen throughout the tunnels and chambers. The shadow entities surged forward in desperation, only to be repelled by an expanding circle of light radiating from the tree. They clawed at the barrier, searching for weaknesses, but found none. From the crystal sphere at the tree's base, tendrils of light rose and wound around the trunk and branches. The captured souls were integrating with the binding mechanism, strengthening it with their essence and purpose. As little girl continued the ritual, a new artifact manifested in the space between the knife and wand, a circular frame of intertwined metal and crystal that hadn't existed moments before. The seal of binding had been reformed from energy and intention, summoned by the power of the ritual. The seal hovered before her, rotating slowly. Within its circumference, symbols arranged and rearranged themselves in patterns too complex to follow. This was the key component that had been missing when the Jensen man tampered with the binding, the master control for the entire containment system. The final step, the coyote urged, limping to her side. Use the knife as it was truly meant to be used, little girl understood. The knife's purpose wasn't bloodshed or sacrifice, but precision, the surgical severing of connections between worlds. She raised the obsidian blade and made a series of careful cuts in the air around the floating seal. Each cut created a line of absolute darkness, not shadow, but the absence of all energy. These lines formed a complex knot pattern around the seal, binding it to this reality while simultaneously isolating it from the shadow realm. As the final cut was completed, the seal flared with blinding light. It expanded rapidly, passing through little girl and the coyote without effect, but driving the shadow entities back toward the pool with irresistible force. They fought against the compression, their forms stretching and contorting as they sought escape. But the seal's power was absolute. It forced them into the pool, which began to shrink as the boundaries between worlds strengthened. From below, from the void beyond the pool, came a response. The ancient entities little girl had glimpsed pushed back against the closing doorway. The floor trembled with their efforts, cracks appearing in the stone around the pool's perimeter. The crystal tree shuddered, its light flickering as the opposing forces battled. The seal began to waver, the knot pattern starting to unravel under the immense pressure from the void. "It's not enough," the coyote said, its voice tight with worry. "The old ones underestimated their strength after all this time." Little girl felt the ritual faltering. The seal needed something more, an anchor, a final component to lock everything in place. The knife and wand had served their purpose in creating the seal, but couldn't maintain it against such opposition from within her dress. The silver locket, empty since releasing the Jensen girl's essence, grew warm against her skin. It rose of its own accord, floating before her eyes. Its surface had changed, the silver now etched with the same knot pattern she had cut around the seal. Little girl understood with sudden clarity. The locket hadn't merely contained the girl's essence, it had been transformed through that connection, becoming a key component of the binding that the old ones never anticipated. Something created not through ancient technology, but through human connection and sacrifice. "The final key," she whispered, reaching for the floating locket. Little girl reached for the floating locket, understanding its significance with sudden clarity. This simple silver ornament had been transformed through its connection with the Jensen girl, becoming something neither the old ones nor the shadows could have anticipated, a bridge between technologies, imbued with human emotion and sacrifice. As her fingers closed around the locket, time seemed to slow. The chamber stilled, shadows frozen mid-motion, the coyote's concerned expression locked in place. Only little girl remained able to move, suspended in a moment between moments. A presence filled the chamber, not physical but undeniable. It radiated from the crystal tree, from the seal, from the very stones themselves. The collective consciousness of the guardians reached out to her mind. You have brought an unexpected element into the equation. Child of the later ones. The binding we created was mathematical, precise, but incomplete. We did not account for connection. The locket pulsed in her hand, warm with more than just physical heat. The little one who gave herself to protect you, her sacrifice altered the pattern. Her essence transformed this simple object into something our science cannot replicate. Understanding flowed through little girl's mind. The Jensen girl's temporary manifestation and sacrifice had created a catalyst, something born of both worlds, yet belonging to neither, the perfect final component for the seal. Complete your work. We will assist. Time resumed its normal flow. The locket hovered above little girl's palm, then shot upward to the center of the floating seal. It passed through the metal and crystal frame, then expanded, its silver surface flowing and reshaping until it formed a disk that perfectly filled the seal's center. The moment the transformation completed, a shockwave of energy pulsed outward. The shadow entities shrieked as the wave passed through them, their forms compressing further toward the pool. The ancient presences, pushing from beyond, redoubled their efforts, causing the entire chamber to shake violently. The final binding. The coyote shouted over the cacophony. "Use the knife one last time!" Little girl raised the obsidian blade, its edge now glowing with white fire. She understood what needed to be done, not just to push the shadows back, but to sever their connection permanently. With a single, precise movement, she slashed the knife through the air above the pool. Reality split along the blade's path. The pool of dark liquid separated from whatever lay beyond. The connection between worlds finally cut. The shadow entities caught on this side wailed as they were drawn inexorably into the seal itself, absorbed into the silver disk at its center. The pool shrank rapidly, the dark liquid evaporating into nothing. Where it had been remained only smooth stone floor, unmarked by its presence. The pressure from beyond ceased immediately. The ancient entities could no longer reach this world through the severed connection. The seal pulsed once more, then descended slowly to merge with the crystal tree. It settled into the trunk just above the amulet, completing a circuit that set the entire structure ablaze with light. The binding was complete, stronger than it had ever been. Little girl swayed on her feet, suddenly exhausted. The ritual had drawn heavily on her own energy, as well as the power of the artifacts. The coyote moved to her side, supporting her with its body. "You've succeeded where many failed," it said, its voice filled with pride. "The binding is restored and strengthened beyond what the old ones created." The chamber continued to shake, but with a different rhythm, more controlled, purposeful. "The final protocol is changing," the coyote explained. "The guardians are not destroying the complex, but sealing it more thoroughly. We must leave quickly." As if in response to these words, a section of wall slid open, revealing a passage that hadn't existed before. Unlike the ancient tunnels, this one sloped steeply upward, clearly a direct route to the surface. "Their gift to you," the coyote said, "an acknowledgement of what you've accomplished." Before they could move toward the new exit, the crystal tree pulsed once more. From its glowing branches, a small object detached and floated down to hover before little girl. A bracelet formed of interwoven crystal and silver, similar in design to the seal but miniaturized and simplified. "The mark of the guardian," the coyote whispered reverently. "They recognize you as one of their chosen." Little girl accepted the bracelet, sliding it onto her wrist, where it adjusted to fit perfectly. The moment it settled against her skin, knowledge flowed into her mind. The locations of all the thin places in her people's territory, the signs of weakness to watch for. the methods to strengthen boundaries without the complex ritual she had just performed. "You are now linked to this place," the coyote explained. "You will know if the shadows ever begin to break through again." The chamber shook more violently, stone dust falling from the ceiling. The crystal tree's light steadied, focusing into a beam that illuminated the new passage. "We must go," the coyote urged. "The guardians are completing their work. This chamber will soon be sealed for generations to come." Little girl took one last look at the crystal tree, now pulsing with steady, healthy light. The shadow entities were gone, contained within the seal. The souls she had rescued in the crystal sphere had merged with the binding, finding peace in purpose. She offered a silent prayer of thanks to the Jensen girl, whose sacrifice had made the difference, then turned toward the escape passage. The obsidian knife and wand had disappeared, their purpose fulfilled, but the bracelet on her wrist glowed with reassuring light. "Your journey as a guardian begins now," the coyote said as they entered the passage. "Your people have maintained this watch for generations without fully understanding its importance. Now you will lead them with knowledge." Behind them, the opening sealed seamlessly, the crystal chamber and its secrets secured once more. Ahead, the passage climbed toward daylight and the world above. Little girl reached for the floating locket, understanding its significance with sudden clarity. This simple silver ornament had been transformed through its connection with the Jensen girl, becoming something neither the old ones nor the shadows could have anticipated, a bridge between technologies, imbued with human emotion and sacrifice. As her fingers closed around the locket, time seemed to slow. The chamber stilled, shadows frozen mid-motion, the coyote's concerned expression locked in place. Only little girl remained able to move, suspended in a moment between moments. A presence filled the chamber, not physical but undeniable. It radiated from the crystal tree, from the seal, from the very stones themselves. The collective consciousness of the guardians reached out to her mind. "You have brought an unexpected element into the equation. Child of the later ones. The binding we created was mathematical, precise, but incomplete. We did not account for connection." The locket pulsed in her hand, warm with more than just physical heat. "The little one who gave herself to protect you, her sacrifice altered the pattern. Her essence transformed this simple object into something our science cannot replicate." Understanding flowed through little girl's mind. The Jensen girl's temporary manifestation and sacrifice had created a catalyst, something born of both worlds, yet belonging to neither, the perfect final component for the seal. "Complete your work. We will assist." Time resumed its normal flow. The locket hovered above little girl's palm, then shot upward to the center of the floating seal. It passed through the metal and crystal frame, then expanded, its silver surface flowing and reshaping until it formed a disc that perfectly filled the seal's center. The moment the transformation completed, a shockwave of energy pulsed outward. The shadow entities shrieked as the wave passed through them, their forms compressing further toward the pool. The ancient presences, pushing from beyond, redoubled their efforts, causing the entire chamber to shake violently. The final binding. The coyote shouted over the cacophony, "Use the knife one last time!" Little girl raised the obsidian blade, its edge now glowing with white fire. She understood what needed to be done, not just to push the shadows back, but to sever their connection permanently. With a single precise movement, she slashed the knife through the air above the pool. Reality split along the blade's path. The pool of dark liquid separated from whatever lay beyond. The connection between worlds finally cut. The shadow entities caught on this side wailed as they were drawn inexorably into the seal itself, absorbed into the silver disc at its center. The pool shrank rapidly, the dark liquid evaporating into nothing. Where it had been remained only smooth stone floor, unmarked by its presence. The pressure from beyond ceased immediately. The ancient entities could no longer reach this world through the severed connection. The seal pulsed once more, then descended slowly to merge with the crystal tree. It settled into the trunk just above the amulet, completing a circuit that set the entire structure ablaze with light. The binding was complete, stronger than it had ever been. Little girl swayed on her feet, suddenly exhausted. The ritual had drawn heavily on her own energy, as well as the power of the artifacts. The coyote moved to her side, supporting her with its body. "You've succeeded where many failed," it said, its voice filled with pride. "The binding is restored and strengthened beyond what the old ones created." The chamber continued to shake, but with a different rhythm, more controlled, purposeful. "The final protocol is changing," the coyote explained. "The Guardians are not destroying the complex, but sealing it more thoroughly. We must leave quickly." As if in response to these words, a section of wall slid open, revealing a passage that hadn't existed before. Unlike the ancient tunnels, this one sloped steeply upward, clearly a direct route to the surface. "Their gift to you," the coyote said, "an acknowledgement of what you've accomplished." Before they could move toward the new exit, the crystal tree pulsed once more. From its glowing branches, a small object detached and floated down to hover before little girl. A bracelet formed of interwoven crystal and silver, similar in design to the seal but miniaturized and simplified. "The mark of the Guardian," the coyote whispered reverently. "They recognize you as one of their chosen." Little girl accepted the bracelet, sliding it onto her wrist where it adjusted to fit perfectly. The moment it settled against her skin, knowledge flowed into her mind. The locations of all the thin places in her people's territory, the signs of weakness to watch for, the methods to strengthen boundaries without the complex ritual she had just performed. "You are now linked to this place," the coyote explained. "You will know if the shadows ever begin to break through again." The chamber shook more violently, stone dust falling from the ceiling. The crystal tree's light steadied, focusing into a beam that illuminated the new passage. "We must go," the coyote urged. "The Guardians are completing their work. This chamber will soon be sealed for generations to come." Little girl took one last look at the crystal tree, now pulsing with steady, healthy light. The shadow entities were gone, contained within the seal. The souls she had rescued in the crystal sphere had merged with the binding, finding peace in purpose. She offered a silent prayer of thanks to the Jensen girl, whose sacrifice had made the difference, then turned toward the escape passage. The obsidian knife and wand had disappeared, their purpose fulfilled, but the bracelet on her wrist glowed with reassuring light. "Your journey as a guardian begins now," the coyote said as they entered the passage. "Your people have maintained this watch for generations without fully understanding its importance. Now you will lead them with knowledge." Behind them, the opening sealed seamlessly, the crystal chamber and its secrets secured once more. Ahead, the passage climbed toward daylight and the world above.